Good evening. Welcome to the February 2025 meeting of the, what are we? Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel. I'm making an executive decision this evening. We're not going to go through the introductions. We've got a lot to do, and so that takes a fair amount of time. I would rather be certain we have good discussion. If you are going to speak, I would ask that before you speak, you introduce yourself then. Okay? Great. I would say next item would be discussion of minutes, but that's actually going to be a much, much later item because we have to talk about what we're going to do about a secretary. And we will do that. Announcements. The big announcement is Judge Morrissey will be leaving us. This is her last meeting, and it's nice that we have an opportunity to say goodbye, and I'm not just sort of announcing it, and like, yeah, she's not here.
No, as I told Aton, it was with a heavy heart that I had to send the email. There comes a point when you realize you just spread yourself too thin, and that point for me is now. So Judge Zone's already put out the announcement looking for somebody to take my spot. So I know that you'll be in good hands after this. But I really enjoyed working with the panel. I really have. It's been an honor. So I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you for everything you've done.
Of course, anytime. Reach out if there's anything I can do to help down the road.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. Okay. The first item is perhaps our major item, and that would be a continuation of the discussion of the proposed legislation regarding equity impact assessments. You also all got the what was the name of that sheet? It begins with a B. Something sheet.
Briefing.
Briefing. Thank you. I'm having a moment here. That was a very hard word for some reason. The briefing sheet, which tells people what to do. And well, you saw it. You read it. I sent it out to everyone. Precisely so we could have this conversation. The discussion, I really wanted both Todd and Susanna to lead this. Todd, particularly because there is a form of the bill that we're, I think, aiming for at this point because we've passed the other deadline. That was not because we're slow, right? It was simply because we just had too much to do, and we realized at a certain point that this was going to be really a 2-year process. However, there is this thing called a short form bill. I don't know what it is either. So, oh yeah, you're all faking it, looking like you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. So, Todd, could you enlighten those of us who are as dumb as I am about short form bills? And I am assuming the antipode would be long form bills. And
Yeah, that's a great question, Eitan. The long form is called, I won't go there. So according to the rules of the House, so there are House rules and there are Senate rules, which are available online. And very quickly, generally speaking, in the first half of the biennium, right, our legislature runs for 2 years. In the first half, bills are accepted in the, I got to look at the real name, standard form is the other one, short form and standard. So standard form bills have to be submitted to Leg Council by a certain date. It's usually the last day in January. In the second half of the biennium, it's much earlier. It's in December. At this point, though, at any time during the biennium, a member can request a bill be drafted in short form. So let me quickly pull up. I'm looking for a just simple example that won't get us in too much trouble. I know, that's a tough one. I have no idea what this bill is, but let me share my screen very quickly and folks can see. Oh, wait, no, this isn't a short form. course, I would find one that wasn't a short form bill. Essentially, it's a one page that simply describes the topic to be addressed in a very broad summary, and it assigns it eventually to a committee of jurisdiction. It'll list who the sponsors are. So let me see if I can just, I had one I was looking at earlier today, but I, for the life of me, can't remember what it was. And none of these, other people were more prepared for their presentations than I was. I don't think folks necessarily need to see it. It's a one pager. It's very straightforward, and it is not something we would have a particular hard time developing from what Susanna and Derek and Lisa put together. And essentially, you know, in conversation with Rep. Arsenal and folks on the House Judiciary, I think there are people who are amenable to proposing a short form bill, which then creates a vehicle for testimony from RDAP and other stakeholders to discuss the possibility of implementing an impact assessment process for the legislative branch. And I'm happy, Eitan, if you want me to talk about sort of what that process would look like, but it may also make sense as Susan is available, or Derek or Lisa, to talk us through the briefing sheet. Whichever, if you want to talk process, I'm happy to do that. Or
let's go with the briefing sheet and then come back to that.
And I'll see if I can find on the sidelines here, people really need to see a short form, I'll find you.
Okay. Susanna or Lisa, do you want to?
Hi.
Hi.
I I am pulling into where I live, but I'm sliding, so I can't talk to you because I need to focus.
Yes, that. Okay. Lisa.
Well, I mean, I will fully admit that Susanna did the bulk of the work on this and Derek added edits. So, Derek, do you want to present this until Susanna comes on, or am I?
I'm happy to
Okay.
just give a
Thank
tiny
you.
more context. I'll
Yeah.
following Eitan's instructions from the top of the order, Derek Miodovnik, Community and Resource, I'm Restorative Justice Executive with the Department of Corrections. Yes, as Lisa correctly stated, you know, we formed that little ad hoc committee, as folks may recall from our last meeting, to put something into play for our collective considerations. Susanna really gave us both the format and the core content, so many thanks. That is that draft briefing document. It's really intended to be a pretty, you know, sort of punchy primer to the legislature about like what in this case an equity impact tool is and why it's necessary. And I think the big salient questions before us as a group really lie in some of the choice points around how we see the optimal process were such a tool to enjoy the legislative support. There's still like, who would do it, right? Would it be leg counsel? Would the primary responsibility fall to the legislator who sponsored the bill? What type of a resource impact would we anticipate, and would we want to try to you know, articulate for legislative consideration? Do we see this tool as scoped to criminal justice and youth justice and corresponding committees of jurisdiction, and or are we as RDAP advancing this within the broader and no less, you know, connected context of all legislation, which of course shows up in the criminal legal space, but isn't confined to it. So I think the goal for tonight is probably less on the wordsmithing and more on these kind of core questions, because that's the argument that we are advancing to the legislature.
My question is, well, maybe I do. Do all those things that you just mentioned, the funding, the resourcing, all that, do those have to be part of a short form bill?
No, and very quickly, I found one, so let me just pull it up here.
And Mark put one in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for doing that. Very quickly, this is what a short form bill looks like. Again, it is who is sponsoring it. Eventually, it would say where it was referred to, the date it was referred, the subject, and that's essentially all. We would want to have, I would say, whoops, did I not share it?
No, not yet.
I talked through it.
Oh, look.
Wait, no, I closed
Page
it.
3 of 9.
Sorry. I am not good at using Zoom as I thought I was. Let me pull up page 115 again.
Okay.
I really apologize. I thought I was on it.
We could just click on the one that.
Yeah, or that is probably faster. Mark is on top of that.
Oh, Lord.
Are folks seeing this? This is.
Yes, thank you.
That's all.
I asked that question because if it really is that short,
yeah,
we don't need to answer all of that right now.
Yes. I mean, I would say
No, I did it because I want to know who's on here. I don't know who these people are at all.
Hello?
You see, one day we don't do intros.
Where were we? I'm all confused now. Todd. So those certain things can be pushed off a bit. How much?
I mean, essentially what happens with a short form bill is one is able to simply introduce the concept, and then the committee, through testimony, develops the language in conversation. And so I think the more prepared we are to provide assessments and things like that, the smoother the sailing, and certainly working in concert. But I think the briefing sheet as it stands, and I think Rep. Arsenault is running late. I think she said she probably couldn't be here till 6:30 or 7.
Yeah, and right. And Rebecca is a similar situation. She's going to show up half an hour late and have to leave like half an hour early.
Yeah. So, I would defer to Angela on kind of exactly how the process would best roll out, but I'm certain that House Judiciary would give us time and space to share ideas, suggest language, and then they would bring in other people to talk about, other stakeholders to talk about other additions to add or change or concerns, and that could certainly be part of cost assessment.
Okay. Judge Morrissey.
Thanks. So I don't know. I've been in the executive branch and judicial branch. I have not been in the legislative branch. So can they reject the short form bill and say we want something more more detailed than this, or do they have to take it in the form that we provided?
How to answer that question effectively? They can. I mean, there are a lot of bills that get introduced with bill numbers that might be 75 pages long that never get a hearing for various reasons. And there could be short form bills that, with the support of a chair and other folks, get filled out into full legislation and move along. So I mean, like any piece of legislation, it can be, it could never come off the wall. That phrase makes sense for folks who don't understand that. Every committee has a cork board with legislation, and sometimes legislation never moves from that cork board to be considered by the committee or passed to the House or the Senate to the body to actually weigh in on. So in what matters there, judges, our ability to advocate and encourage the committee of jurisdiction to move forward. And there is a question whether it would be House Judiciary or GovOps would be another one. And I have had briefer conversations with the chair of GovOps about it than I have with House Judiciary. But that's not to say there's not an ability to really help move things. I will say short form bills, because they have to get fully fleshed out, and we are looking at, closing in on crossover. I think we talked about that last time. There will be time pressure if we want to imagine something happening this first half of the biennium.
One other piece I just want to give a little voice to, and Susanna flagged this in our initial conversation, is in addition to those other sort of implementation considerations, the pace through which, if and when a proposed piece of legislation does get taken up, and what a fast moving legislative machinery that is, and how that would comport or not with the thoughtful nature of this process and potentially the iterative nature of it too. I just think were just some other questions that I didn't want to lose as well. And we can see Susanna now too, which is always a bonus. So yeah.
I'm wondering if we should make a list of the questions that are ahead of us, and from that list decide which ones we feel need to be answered ASAP, I guess. Correct, Todd?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I would say candidly, and again, we could get Angela's opinion on this as one legislator, that we've got enough to request a short form bill. I think it would then be incumbent on this group. I think the body should probably vote on whether to move forward with legislation along the lines of the briefing sheet or otherwise, and then be ready, whether it's the subcommittee and the chair or others, to respond to requests for testimony.
Okay. I just put two things in the chat: resourcing, breadth of effects, meaning do we stay with the criminal and juvenile justice systems, which is our purview after all. This question came up, you'll remember, or some of you will remember, with our last report. There were a couple moments where there was some debate about whether to broaden it beyond simply the criminal or juvenile justice systems, or to, as I said, stay in our lane. And there were really good arguments, I felt, on both sides. And I'm really wishy-washy. I am terribly wishy-washy. I'm sorry Jeff isn't here, because Jeff usually is really good at articulating the history of movements, at least in the United States, that may spring from racial disparity, racial discrimination, and then get broadened out legislatively to include other vectors of human identity, and then race kind of gets forgotten. He lived through a lot of that. And he has spoken quite passionately about it, as has Sheila. But I'm not pinning Sheila, in here on thinking the same way necessarily with this, because this is different. But that would seem to me to be a big question, and part of me feels like I want to hedge my bets and not cover it. And worry about it when we get to the longer stuff. But that's certainly open for a discussion, and that's breadth of effects. Sheila.
See, that's what happens when you mention my name.
I know. I invoke you.
So yes, thank you for that. So I'm just going to comment on this. That was the one thing reading it that really arose for me from all of this was, are we going to just stick to these branches or are we going to open it up more? In terms of what was written, I thought it was fine. I was like, yes, sure. But could we do more? I understand why some people would stay in your lane, but I wish racism would stay in its lane, whatever lane that is. But, I don't think that's really kind of possible. So considering that, I'm up to advocating for, taking up all the highway if that's possible. And if not, I understand, not necessarily agree why people might not want to do that.
Sure. Thank you. I actually invoked you at the subcommittee meeting on Friday, Sheila, because I said, Sheila will say one thing and then I'll go, oh, okay, great. That's a good idea. Let's go there. And then Jeff will say something else. I go, oh, that's a good idea. I mean, I'm like the wind on this one. I can go, but I like what you just said. I think that's great. Anybody else? Come on in. Is this something that people feel like there's going to be a lot of debate on the panel about? How are you all feeling about that? Even if you don't have a sense yet of where you fall, is this something? Okay, Tyler.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and weigh in. I think Sheila's point is excellent, and I fully appreciate that. And I think the part of me that also sees the other side of the argument is a strategic one. So I have there's no part of me that's saying no, we shouldn't do that, or I would want to debate or fight against that if we wanted to broaden it more. But when I think strategically, it seems to me that when we talk about juvenile and criminal justice, the disparate impact likely has more significant and severe consequence. I guess I shouldn't say that to be unequivocally true, because it's very hard to measure that, but I do think this is an area where we see disparity. We know the consequences very real and very prescient. So I think I do lean a little bit more towards the other side, which is just strategically keeping it focused to justice. But I certainly wouldn't fight it if the group overall feels the other way.
Got it. Thank you. Judge Morrissey. You're muted, ma'am.
Sorry about that. About how much spill to other areas when you talk about housing, access to mental health services, access to substance use services, those all impact juvenile justice. They impact criminal justice system. But at the same time, if we're doing this on a short form, I'm wondering if it becomes so overwhelming that if we have all of these different things that we want to pursue, that the legislature just kind of throws up their hand and says, like, how do we even begin to grapple with this in the time that we have left? So I'm wondering if we're going to do it this time, if it makes more sense to keep it narrow with the goal of trying to at least get the ball rolling on this, as opposed to having them think it's just too much it's just too overwhelming in the time that they have to work with it. So just my thought.
I like that. I like that. Anybody else? Susanna, oh wait, Rebecca.
Every time I look for this brief that was sent around, which was excellent, by the way, I don't know who's actually on that subcommittee, but my goodness, thank you so much. It's like a nearly final draft. I mean, it's really well done. So thank you. I don't know who and how many hours were involved with that, but I can tell a lot of nice and deep thinking. Appreciate it. I have very little to suggest, but I'm with Sheila, focused on that one part about broadening it in terms of coverage. And I'd be curious to hear whether the representative has any insight into this. My perspective going into the legislature is I like to maximize the options for the representatives. in a bill because they can always narrow, right? And if we don't go big, then that's a harder direction to go. So that's just my personal experience going in there. And actually, Sheila, I appreciate you suggesting even going bigger than what I was thinking, but I noticed that the way, and again, I've lost the language, there was something about new. It's just dealing with new juvenile and criminal legislations, right? But to me, then that suggests, oh, well, let's take up an amendment to a current statute, making it worse.
Right.
Increasing the
Okay.
sentence that this is outside the purview. So I would just drop new. It's just anything related to, and I hear and support Sheila. I think I'd like to hear others on this, and certainly the strategy I appreciate, but the exact question on strategy for me leans back and be expansive because it's always about compromise.
Okay. Sheila, you're next.
I'm just sort of curious of thinking about, will it create desperate outcomes, excuse me, if we only focus on certain branches? That's a question that I've been curious about. When we say like, oh, they'll just be frustrated or too much and just maybe they won't do this, and then will that mean that they're more likely to do the other work in the other branches and follow through with those bills and those things because it's too much over here to do the assessment? So I'm just wondering, if it's not put across the board, will that create an inequity that we didn't necessarily think or anticipate?
Yeah. That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Derek.
Yeah, in many ways, Sheila, you may have anticipated some of my thinking because I heard you use the language branches, which I took to mean branches of government as opposed to just committees, right? And if so, yeah. So yeah, having had the privilege to be part of the subcommittee discussion with Susanna and Lisa, as well as Eitan, one of the logics that I really appreciated as a framing argument that Susanna made is that the other branches of government utilize this. The executive branch applies an equity overlay to budgetary decision making. And so if we are thinking of this across a tricameral, three branches, then I think far be it for us to recommend only certain nooks and crannies within the legislative branch. And even though I understand that this is coming out of RDAP, and RDAP has a charter, ultimately, if it's being picked up by a legislator, that's an agent within that entire branch of government. So I say go big and not go home, or big is home in this case.
Okay. I'm of course on the fence, so I'm useless. But I'm listening. I want to just put again out there what Judge Morrissey's saying, and they get so nervous. The legislators just get, and I get it. I get it. I really do. And I think there is something strategic also about making it small, but then Rebecca's point's really important. Go big and throw it all out there, and they're gonna whittle it down because that's what they do. Do we, I guess, want to talk this through more? At which point I'm gonna say, let's figure out some clever language that means we don't have to deal with it right now in the short form bill and we can talk about it more. Or do people want to come down on one side or the other tonight? Judge Morrissey.
I was just going to say, do we think Representative Arsenault is going to come tonight? Because I think it would be really helpful. I think it'd be really helpful to hear from her what she thinks would be the reaction if it went in with this fairly broad concept and how they would address that. So
That's a good point.
I would vote to table the discussion until she gets here.
Okay. Okay. Do we want to take a formal vote? Is everyone all right with waiting until she gets here? Just nod your head,
Okay.
put your thumb up, something like that. Okay, we're gonna wait till she gets here. She had said she sent me an email. Oh boy. And now I'm going back through several billion of them, telling me what time she thought. I think she thought she'd be here now.
Between 6:30 and 7.
Right. And then so let's do something else for half an hour and we'll get back to her. The need for a new secretary. Oh, Rebecca, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Just a quick clarification question on this. I noticed my name is on there tasking me with some special homework.
It was more of a suggestion about where we could get some good stuff than a tasking, Rebecca.
I just wanted to say I saw that I haven't had time to think. I'm in a little bit of a brain overload, and so all of a sudden last year feels like 30 years ago. So I can't remember what
It was
and the number. Yeah, but
there was a section that we thought might be effective to show examples of previous legislation that failed to have any type of an equity analysis and resulted in demonstrably disparate impact. So shitty legislation from an equity perspective. And I just instinctively thought, given the depth of your work, and I also thought about the on the youth justice side and past presentations that Marshall's given, that perhaps you'd have examples at the ready, but it wasn't intended as a tasking so much as who I thought might be some subject matter experts on sort of cautionary tales about well-intended, but all the same inequitably impacting legislation.
On that note, and Eitan, maybe this is something I say for new business, but CRG's latest racial disparities data analysis goes right to that, Derek, and it's not so much focused on past legislation that's passed. It's just that here's the latest numbers on bail, on sentencing, on whatever it is that CRG has. And they were willing to come and talk to us next month, as early as next month. But again, we can figure it out to see where we're at. And the spoiler is that we're not anywhere good. We're not even holding. We're back sliding. It's worse.
Before justice reinvestment too, long before.
Which is depressing. But I feel like relevant for this discussion, and I'll
I
stop.
agree. Yeah. Okay. If we may, the next item, so that we can deal with that before Representative Arsenault shows up. On the need for a new secretary, there isn't much to describe here. Todd is currently splitting his concentration, trying to take very rough notes. I didn't even offer because I suck. I just suck at taking notes. I'm leaving it there. And that's something that needs to happen, obviously. There are a couple of routes here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it if we don't have to. We can oh, hold on. Give me one sec. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. We can make it very formal, and the thing about formality is, of course, there's a certain correlation with transparency, right? If we have a formal vote and this is how we do it. The downside of that is it's going to take forever and it's not like we don't have things to do, to be that formal. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I don't think transparency is a good thing. I'm not sure it's always the prime mover of importance for everything under the sun. We're talking about getting someone to take notes. What do people think? And let's not spend as too much time on this if we possibly can. That's my balancing act right now. Sheila.
So I'm not going to take notes. I don't
Ah.
think I don't think any panel member, unless it improves their ability to be present for this meeting, should be doing the notes, because
Yes.
that is a really can be for some people a very distractive and disengaging, a way to show up but and disengage at the same time.
Right.
And I think again we should send it out to our BIPOC networks such as Vermont POC and to other organizations such as the Root and other entities that might have, be able to showcase that on their social media or whatever, if somebody puts something together. In terms of how we take notes, I am open to how we take notes. I like an in between. I don't like notes that are so vague that you really had to be in the meeting to understand what will happen. And I don't necessarily always think it's necessary to have everybody's name and things verbatim. I like something a little bit in between, and I respect all of the above, but that's what I would like to see. And I would love to have a person of color in that role. And yeah, those are my thoughts.
Jessica Lee Smith. We're
Hi
not
there. Hi there. I know I'm not on the committee. I just wanted to make a point of saying thank you guys for letting me come to this, and thank you for the work that you do. I have a lot of respect for you. I wanted to ask you guys, when it comes to the notes, I definitely think for me, as a person who gets identified as a person of color, I find that if I don't write it down or if I don't record it, later on, people will then deny certain things, maybe having worked on certain things, and that's scary because in certain situations. Number two, I just wanted to ask you guys to be sure, maybe you did it already, and I don't know. I'm only on this first meeting ever. With the justice reform, is there some way of making oversight in there and making sure that that new version is not misused? Maybe some things can slip in here if there's a bad guy here and there that comes in here or whatever. How do we check things and make sure that when it comes to people of color or people that are different, that we check things twice to make sure that everything is factual and all the evidence is there? You know what I mean?
right. That's a good point. And that's something I know that it's come up throughout our conversations about this.
Yeah, it's scary only because like for some of us, like I also have this look like who did it and ran. So like wherever I go, I always look like the guilty party. So if I don't have somebody who will literally look at my evidence, I'm always going to be looked at like I'm the guilty one for some reason.
Okay.
And I can't do anything about it. I'm just saying maybe there's some way of like putting oversight or like making the person who makes recommendations about someone or whatever it is substantiate that to a certain degree amongst many people, not just people on their said committee or their friends or in their area. Thank you very much for letting me talk.
Okay, thank you. Let us leave this for a moment because Representative Arsenault has joined and we haven't gotten too far into it. So I think we'll be able to remember where we are. Representative, good evening. We stopped because we got to a point where we needed you.
I'm sorry, I was late finishing up another meeting.
Right, of course. It's the session. The question has to do with how much to put out there. We were sort of focusing on questions of breadth, like going beyond the criminal and juvenile justice system, because of course, discrimination, as Judge Morrissey had brought up, I mean, you're going to see it in a lot of places. Housing, you're going to see it in education. I mean, it's going to be in a bunch of spots. However, Judge Morrissey also said that it might be a little daunting for the legislators to see this and think, oh my God, we're doing this for every bill. And maybe strategically there's a way of doing this so that we're not, as it said, spilling the beans before we absolutely have to. What think you?
I have thought about this and I've gone back and forth, and I'm sorry if there's background noise. I'm now walking from said meeting to my car, but I've thought at one point, I thought, well, maybe we use this as sort of a pilot, if you will, to work on a racial equity or a disparity assessment in the realm in which the panel specializes, if I can use that word.
Okay.
Just as like a proving ground, a testing ground. That's one thought I've had. I could also be swayed that why not just go for it, recognizing, acknowledging exactly what you shared, that Judge Morrissey shared. I can't really think of a policy area, or a committee jurisdiction where there is not potential for disparate impacts. So,
right.
I do think that there would be process-wise, I wonder if we were to introduce a bill that proposed the farthest, widest reach, would it then need to visit every committee, or would it just go through government operations and then they would, they would be able to kind of deem it so. And I don't know the answer to that. Just process wise. So I'm not being helpful because I've thought about this, but I haven't landed anywhere very solidly. I'm very curious sorry if I missed this part of the discussion already, but I'm curious to hear what you all think, and I would be open. I could support either, certainly, which again, I know is not helpful.
No, we work these things through. We get criticized all the time for talking too much. Apparently 5 reports isn't enough for people. Anybody want to weigh in who's already weighed in? Yes, Sheila, you want to weigh in. Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell her, what my thoughts were.
Please.
One of my biggest concerns is, as I was thinking about us only using this in certain legislative branches, it alarmed me to think that that might create inequities within itself that we didn't think of. So it might mean that only bills or things are being done because it's more convenient or easier or less troublesome or whatever, if this is not attached to whatever branch, whatever committee, whatever. And so my biggest concerns is if we don't put it throughout the whole, and that it will create inequities. My other concern is that why not go big? Because for the reasons that were all mentioned, racism is everywhere. And I really liked what someone said about being able to scale down rather than scale up. And I really thought about that when you said that, because, it it is naturally easier to scale down. I think in general for most people. And scaling up can be challenging. And I think it can go either way, but I really think that we should start with scaling up and putting it to the test. And like I said in our last meeting, that this isn't about perfection. Like nobody's going to get this perfect. Nobody's probably even going to get it right. And what is right, right? And the reality is it's practice, it's culture building, it's understanding, it's so much more than just a thing. And we have to understand that we're investing in years, like 7 generations, right? We're planting the seed now because we know that these are the generations to follow who really need this. And so if we don't start now, then there's another generation gone,
Right.
So I feel like that those are some of the points that I had made, and I
Okay.
added some more.
Yes, I actually, you just sparked another thought for me, which is to your point about that natural, you didn't call it a natural inclination, so I don't not putting words in your mouth, but the it is easier to scale down than scale up. That may be actually making the case for putting for the bill to be as wide as possible, knowing that wherever this bill goes, which like say in government operations, they may want to scale it down. So the idea of not starting, don't start, don't propose that where you want it to end up. I've learned in bill drafting, it
Go
can be
for the
good.
moon. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be good to put some things in that you can use as negotiating tools. As frustrating as that is, it can be good to put some stuff in there that, and not that you'd ever want to give up on going as big as possible, but maybe that ends up being the compromise. Like, oh, okay, you want to just try this out in, criminal and juvenile justice bills for 2 years and see how that goes. Okay, maybe we can agree to that, that kind of thing.
Right.
To give the committee something to work with.
Okay. One thing I just want to put in here, and then Rebecca, you go, but it does sound like we have decided as a group that this question has to be resolved before the short form bill is submitted. I just want to put that out there because we're still doing this. And I had sort of asked before, we need to make a decision on what we need to do now and what we can leave for a bit later. The more thorny things that we really have to work out. So I just want to point that out, that the panel seems to have gone to, we got to get this figured out at least. Just want to say that in case I'm wrong and y'all don't want to go there, I won't try to facilitate in that direction. Rebecca.
To that point, Eitan, I would support us trying to resolve that question at tonight's meeting some way, somehow. That seems fundamental, not something you can go back on. And Representative Arsenault, just for you to share, I was also citing on the erring on this siding with going big because of just how politics works to narrow things down, even if that could complicate process and numbers of committees. But here is my question actually related to this, and it's to Susanna regarding this all or narrow. There's a reference at the beginning of this to the executive agencies that are currently required to complete equity impact assessments. The language used here indicates that it's not to certain subject matters, like what we're trying to decide now, but it's to everything. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, this is for all new budget and policy proposals that are going to originate out of the executive branch. And the expectation from when we first implemented this in 2020 was always that we would begin with the things that were newly proposed, and that once we got a rhythm and gained comfort and confidence using the tool, that we would go back and look retrospectively at existing things.
Dear God, let's not bring that up right now.
Thank you for that. And just to finish that loop, I think it's even more smooth or natural for us then to adopt a similar model in terms of at least not limiting based on subject matter, but it's across the board. I would just still stand on my previous suggestion, which is we don't limit it to new, but it's all new if it's reviewing a current statute or a brand new thing. So I would just take away the new, as I see that as too limiting.
Oh, that's so like just take out that word.
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Because otherwise that would arguably foreclose a review of a current crime where they want to increase the sentence or something.
Okay. Good. We've got something down. Judge Morrissey.
So I'm just trying to look at it from a more like a practical standpoint. I mean, I agree with all the points made in terms of the carryover that the racial issues have to other areas besides criminal justice and juvenile justice. My question is, like, in the time that we have, is it realistic to think that we can really grapple with all this before the crossover date? And Todd, when did you say the crossover date was?
I didn't say, but it's generally the week after town meeting week. So the second week, the end of the second week in March.
So we have like 3 weeks. So we're going to give them this short form concept, and then in the next 3 weeks, expect that the teeth of this are all going to be put together by the legislature. And I guess my concern, I just don't know if the legislature moved that quickly. And my concern continues to be that they're going to look at this as being so overwhelming that it's just not going to leave the cork board or whatever whatever it was, the wall that it gets pinned on, because they think it's too big to deal with. And to me, the biggest issue would be, let's get something in place so that this idea actually does take shape, and in the next year or two it can look at being expanded. But I'm concerned it never gets off the ground in the short time that we have, especially because it's the short form and we're not going to give them a lot of detail up front to work with. So I'm interested in people who've actually worked with the legislature to see, and Representative Arso, obviously you would be maybe the best person to answer this. Is it realistic in the next 3 weeks, if we give them the legislature this concept, that they're going to be able to put all of the body of it together to make it into a bill?
Well, I will say, believe it or not, the governor's education plan is going to come to the committee as a short form bill, which is hilarious. But my concern, my question, I guess, now would be, at this point, does the committee, again, I'll just assume that it would be going to government operations, because I think that is the most likely place. Do they have their calendar filled out, for up until crossover? Is this something, and how active has their Senate counterpart been? Are they going to have time after crossover? Are they going to get very many bills from the Senate? If not, they would have time ostensibly after crossover to work on it and take it up again next session. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I can certainly ask the chair and ranking member of that committee where they stand. I mean, they unfortunately, without casting judgment, they have been tied up. They haven't done anything other than the Bennington one contested race. They have been taking testimony on that. We voted last Friday. That's all they've been able to do so far this session. So I would imagine they have a lot of, they handle all the charters, and so yeah, it's very likely that their calendar is kind of booked at this point. But so realistically, we might be talking about fleshing all of this out next session.
Sheila,
Thank you for that because that raises some questions for me. I apologize if I don't remember in the briefing a date in which this would be implemented. Susanna, was there in the briefing a date in there or anybody who can answer that? So I I sort of assumed we were talking about the next legislative session, so that just raises a lot of questions for me because what I think I'm hearing some folks say is that we are voting on this and going to implement it like tomorrow or something, and then this legislative body right now in the middle of, not the middle really, but during their session is going to have to start doing this. Was that the plan? Is there a timeline? Did I totally miss something? I apologize if I did. I'm just not remembering. Yeah, so I guess let me just ask that because then I might have another question.
Okay, Todd, do you want to weigh in on that?
Unless Judge Morrissey's going to, I'm happy to.
Oh,
No,
okay. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I was assuming the opposite of Sheila. So if we were looking at next session, I may change my opinion. I thought this was all going to be done, try to be done in the next month or two. So if that's not the case, then I'm happy to go with the expansive view.
Great.
Okay,
think-
so let's just clarify that. What are we talking about in terms of timeline? What are we talking about?
So as far as implement, I just want to make sure I got the question right. Sheila, is your question, when would we request that impact assessments start being undertaken by the legislature?
In the way we're speaking about today.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, the legislature at the end of the day gets to choose that. I think our recommendation would be as soon after the bill became signed into law as possible. And that, so generally, when a bill passes, it's effective on July 1 of the year that it passes. You know, this is something where there may be, you know, and Susanna knows what this process is like better than most, and Laura probably too. There may be a, you know, they'll have to figure out what the appropriate assessment tool is and do trainings and things like that. So, I mean, we'd want to engage in a conversation, pushing them to be as quick as possible. But it wouldn't, I mean, they wouldn't be doing it this session, this half of the biennium in any event. I just, and candidly, it's hard for me to see us getting the level of engagement we're going to want to get, right? Because this does impact every legislator. I think we really want to take, candidly, as much time as we can to talk to our networks, to talk to our representatives, to work what I would call the ground game around it and not just rely on testimony in committee, so that we really get a broad-based level of support for this work. Because otherwise I think it could run into some real sort of challenges as legislators are like, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, or whatever else they may say, as opposed to really understanding holistically why it's so important.
Okay.
Great, thank you. That answers my questions.
I want to put in just a couple of items and then I'll call everybody else whose hand. Oh, your hands went down. Okay.
Well, I'll just ask because it didn't answer my question. So is the plan to introduce this bill? I thought it was to introduce this in the next, like this session. And I understand that the assessments would be down the road, but the plan is still to introduce it this session, correct? So I go back to my earlier comments that I'm really concerned about the time frame we have if we go too expansive on a proposal now. So that's it.
Rebecca.
I think that, and the answer to that question in terms of whether or not to rush to get something that can start to be considered by the legislature this session is actually a really critical one. And it's critical to keep in mind. I didn't know this, and I'm gonna mess it up. So I hope others will come in and explain it better. But we are at the first year of a biennium, which means that we will have essentially 2 years or a little less because the session has already started to get a bill through. So if we sat and tried to just build up our coalition, build up and wordsmith the perfect draft bill before it drops, and we decide to go big, which something that would require potentially a lot of different committees, as Representative Arsenault talked about in terms of the process, and just a lot more discussion and consideration, given it's a bigger scope, that the likelihood, and I think this is what Todd was referring to, the likelihood of getting something like that big, that new, started and finished in one session is really tough, which is why I think strategically it makes sense for us to get something to land this session. But others can weigh in and let me know if they think otherwise.
Well, Rebecca, a question back to you. What does that mean then, that we go in terms focusing on the idea of the breadth? Does that mean we go narrow? Does that mean we go bigger? What does that mean to you?
It doesn't change my position in terms of the breadth. We
Okay.
should do what we think is best, knowing how this process will work, whether it's the political, I'm willing to support, where everyone is, but it doesn't change my position. I think we should go big, because it is, and there's already a natural trend. We have the examples, real life process in the executive branch right now. That's all. In any case, I'm hoping others can talk about how a bill that's introduced this session can come back next session, right? Is it a place in line that it's incentivized to get in this session as opposed to next? I'll stop, but those are my questions.
Can I just
Angela, Coach? Oh, okay, never mind.
if I
Todd's
can
go.
just, sorry, Eitan, just one, I just want to make sure I'm understanding language appropriately, or I'm using the right words. So when I refer to a session, it's a 2-year elected period of time, and we are in the first half of this biennium or session. And so there are different rules depending on whether we're in the first half of the biennium, it's all the same session, or the second half. And I think I just want to make sure, Rebecca, that I'm squaring that with what you said just to better understand.
No, thanks. I was being sloppy on the use of session, right?
I'm sorry I can't raise my hand because now
It's
I'm driving. I'm
okay.
just taking you all along for this end of my day. So do you mind if I offer my
No,
thoughts on this?
please, just go. Go.
Okay. So I refer to when I say a session, I'm talking about the current year. So right now, to me, we are in the 2025 session, which is the first year of the 25-26 biennium. And so getting a bill in this session, meaning before we adjourn, in May, theoretically, I think is the way to go, because then if nothing else, you get a first reading, and that means, with a short form bill, and anytime there are more than, I think, 10 bills to be introduced, they're introduced by name only. And so it would be, H255, an act relating to requiring an equity impact assessment on all legislation. Something like that. And it would be read on the House floor, and then it would get assigned to a committee. And then, in my mind, that at least starts the conversation. And it gives everyone something to point to continue the conversation. So as you're working that ground game, I think that Todd referred to, was it ground game? You can point to, like, hey, can I talk to you about H255? And it's a little more concrete than, like, we have this idea for a bill that we're thinking of introducing next session. And it's just, I think it's a more effective way to start to seed the conversation. And the committee, wherever it is assigned, again, let's say government operations, it will literally be pinned to the wall. And the committee can take it up at any point during the biennium. So my hunch, my hope would be that it would generate conversation and ideas from now until May, and then throughout the summer and fall, and that government operations might be ready, inclined and ready to pick it up, to take it off the wall at the start of the 2026 session next year. Does that help?
Yes. I want to put this in and then Sheila, you go. Open question. Is the briefing sheet as it presently exists acceptable as a short form bill? You're shaking your head, Derek. What does it need?
Well, I mean, it's got a bunch of like, again, the suggestions on the examples. That was just my thought. You know, it needs to be cleaned up a little bit.
Okay. Okay. But basically it's here. That was the question.
Hey, Tom, I'm sorry, I'm confused because I thought we were debating the one critical piece that's not here, which is the broadness, the categories.
Right. No,
Okay.
I'm just
But you're
trying to
saying
go
the side.
back and pull together where we are as a whole, and then we can do that again. But I'm just because if that's not here, then we're really not ready, as opposed to just not ready. And I just want to be clear
So
that
the answer to your
go ahead.
question, yes, that on a short form, the core substance of it really boils down to one, maybe two sentences. We can
Okay.
extract one, maybe two sentences from this. So as
Okay.
long as we know that missing piece, which is the breadth of topic or subject
Okay.
matter, then yeah, we can just extract whatever sentence we need to from here, and that's fine for a
Great.
short.
That's what I needed to hear. Thank you, Susanna. Sheila.
I do want to say I've been very quiet. I'm so sorry. I was about to upstream you. I'm sorry. Let me shut up.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You had something.
Sorry, I was just gonna say the less we put in there, the more it could go completely left. As a child, I grew up in a semi-urban environment, so I've never held a firecracker in my life, but my understanding is there's one type of firecracker that you light it and you don't know what it's gonna, and I'm reminded of that imagery. So if you let them have free reign over a short form, you don't know what it's going to look like. So if we know that there's something in there that we want or that's non-negotiable, it makes sense at least to begin with that so that it doesn't end up being a big slog to get close to what we want.
Okay. Is there anything that anyone noticed in their reading of this that is missing? Okay, good. That's helpful. That means that what we need to do is finish this discussion about breadth. Does everyone agree about that? You can nod. This isn't Roberts. Okay. Sheila, now you. Sorry.
Thanks, Aton. No worries. I would just I just want, I'm a vibe check, keeping it real kind of person. People know what's up. I'm just going to remind us what administration we're in again and what's happening on the national discourse and how that's impacting Vermont. Now is the time to absolutely do this. We have to do this. We have people who look like me dying here in Vermont, being all sorts of things happening to people. And with our national administration and the impacts that it's having on us, it is not only our duty to really do something, it's so timely that this is the time to do it right now. If we fail not to do it right now, not only are we, I feel like with our national discourse, that's going to play out in a much different way. And so now's the absolute time.
Would agree. Grant. Grant, you're mute. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I just totally agree that it's a great time for Vermont to take something like this and put it into law for the, law of the land. We can really take a chance to lead here. And I think that we're just better off if we give it a shot. I like the idea of going broader rather than narrow to start with.
Okay. Todd. Oh, what? Okay. hold on, Todd. I'm going to ask you a question after Judge Morrissey, and then me.
So I am much more comfortable taking a broad view on this now that I understand it's like a 2-year project. That if the idea is to get something in to begin discussion and that this is going to go over to the next year, then, and maybe I just misunderstood that from the get-go. I thought this was something we were trying to do this year, and I didn't see how it was realistically possible. But if this is a 2-year project, then I think going big is, I think it's much more, it's easier to do that. So I'm swayed.
Okay. Then that question is settled, I think. Do you want to vote?
Yes.
Okay, let us vote. Todd, I'm going to imagine that because I know her well, Sheila would like a name, oh God, a roster of who voted how. Okay? This is only open to the panel members. Someone want to make a motion?
I move that, well, actually, I don't know exactly what the motion is, so I'm not gonna make the motion.
That we're going to go with the broadest.
Wait, Lisa might have it.
Oh, never
Oh,
mind.
no, I was just gonna be ready to say so moved to what Aton proposed.
Okay, my bad. Okay.
That we're going to go with the broadest possible applicability that this bill can have in the legislature.
So,
this
so
session.
it's clear, the briefing that was presented to us tonight,
Mhm.
we plan to take that to turn into a bill, short form, with additionally adding all the legislative branches that are applicable in Vermont.
It's only going to be a couple sentences, but yeah.
But that's what we're voting on.
Yes.
Motion. There you go.
That's the motion. Or
I'll second that.
I'm not allowed to give a motion.
Wait, I'm
I'm just
confused now,
describing.
actually. I thought we were expanding the subject beyond criminal and juvenile delinquency.
That's what she just said.
Right. So when you say all branches of the legislature, Sheila, you're talking about mental health, housing, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Subject matters of the bill itself is what I was thinking of it as.
Well, I guess maybe for clarity and clarity for the community that is here too, because I guess I need just a little bit of clarity. Earlier, this came up and I was like the branches, and maybe I'm just ignorant versus committees. And so I'm not really, if somebody could just explain that so we all understand it better before we finish the vote.
The branches are the legislative, the judiciary, and the executive. The committees that we're discussing all sit within the legislature. Okay? So it's and each of those committees have different things they're worried about, different foci. And so, they're going to look at it from different angles. That's all. Does that help?
Yes, that helps. So was other people's thoughts, can other people say what their thoughts were? So Rebecca, can you just say that what you thought was just the branches? Can you just say what you were in your head so I can just understand from that perspective as well?
I thought we were going to suggest expanding the scope of all bills, basically, that are being proposed by any committee within the legislature, whether it's on the House or the Senate side, whether it concerned criminal justice or health or education or hunting, right?
I don't think there was a disagreement. Did
Yeah,
I
no,
miss something?
Rebecca's helping to explain to make sure, like, I wanted to make sure that I understand, and we have community people on as well, and
Got
wanting
it.
to make sure it's really clear. So basically everything.
Basically everything, exactly. And so,
great, I'm on the same page.
okay, and I think we are too. Todd put some draft
Yes.
proposal language in the chat, and I don't know if everyone can see it. And Todd, if you want to read it out loud.
I will read it.
Thank you.
That the panel proposed legislation that would require the use of an impact assessment tool for all legislative proposals by the legislature.
So moved.
Is anyone seconding it?
I second it.
I'd second that.
Is there any further discussion? Okay.
Lisa,
All
Who
what?
moved? Okay, thank you.
Lisa moved. And Sheila and I both seconded.
That's right. The seconded got seconds. No.
I'll third it, Todd. You don't need that. But Sheila can have the second.
Okay. All
Appreciate
in
that
favor,
effort.
please raise a hand. It's easier. It is unanimous with all the panel members, Todd. So we are going there. Great. I'm assuming the next task is to extract the draft bill from the briefing sheet. Am I correct? Okay. Dr. Ness Redden-Longo's up to his whatever in go ahead, Rebecca. I'll wait.
I agree. I was just catching something in my final editing moment that we're not using the word racial impact in here. We're just generally saying impact. I might have missed something in the briefing. I just want to make sure that whatever we're delivering is actually not just a generic impact assessment tool. Take it wherever you want, which is another way, but I didn't think we were going that broad. Anyways, I feel like I'm stating the obvious.
I think that's a technical and very good point, Rebecca. I
Yeah.
think I would amend my position on the vote if we were willing to change to add the word racial before the word impact assessment tool.
Okay. You want to vote on that?
I imagine it won't go differently, but I think
I
technically we
don't think it
probably
will
should.
either.
What was the proposal, Tyler? I'm sorry, I
The
missed it.
proposal is to amend what we've already voted on to add the word racial before impact assessment tool. So the draft motion would actually be, the amended draft motion is that the panel propose legislation that would require the use of a racial impact assessment tool for all legislative proposals by the legislature.
Do we want to say equity instead of racial, or
Yeah, I think we just need to maybe name the tool.
The tool itself, yeah.
I would say equity impact.
Right, Susanna, what do you think about that? We should, if we're using this tool, we should just name the tool, right?
I mean, that's if the legislature chooses to adopt the one that's used by the executive branch, then it's just the impact assessment tool because it is equity. It's also technically performance management, and I get this. I don't think that they're going to want that piece of it because that's more work. But I will say that, you know, our office, we lead with race, but we have also included other portions of this impact assessment that is not race focused. For example, there's one question that asks, could a disparate impact occur between members of other demographic groups like geographic, you know, gender identity, religion, that kind of thing. So if we care that there may be a disparity on one of those other measures, then it might make sense not to limit it to race. But I think the question then becomes, you know, the environmental justice advocates are going to say, well, we should have an environmental impact assessment, or well, we should have a such and such impact assessment. So, you know, I think we need to decide. I guess, whether we care that it's broad, because I think even if they pass this, we could say you've got to do a racial impact assessment. There's nothing that stops them from creating a tool that is racial impact assessment and that includes other stuff, right? They're meeting our minimum floor. So I guess, are we saying we want to make sure race is in there, or we want to make sure only race is in there?
I could propose the panel. Oh, I've got something blocking. God, I hate computers. That the panel propose legislation that would require the use of a human identity impact assessment tool for all legislative proposals by the legislature.
Are there aspects of equity that may not be identity based that we might be missing, like socioeconomic or geographic, perhaps?
I think of I don't know. You'll have to answer. I think of those as identity.
Maybe instead of naming it, we just name what it does. So an assessment tool that assesses the impact of proposed legislation with respect to any of the following, but not limited to any of the
Right.
following.
But not limited to.
Race, blah, blah, blah.
So an impact assessment tool regarding race, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression, class. That would be the list I would propose for including but not limited to. What have I missed? Able, ability. Grant?
Yeah, so I was just going to clarify, we're asking that they use a tool, not specifically the tool that we were shown.
No. We're not going there.
I
We're
mean,
not
I would
going
love,
there.
I would love if they did use that one.
Yes.
But I think we also have to prepare for the possibility that they might want to develop
Yes.
their own, in which case I would still strongly advocate to be part of a process and create something that's as closely aligned as possible. I think it makes sense, right? If you've got one branch of government dueling with another one over proposed legislation, we should be using the same or an extremely similar tool to do our assessments.
Then why don't we just leave that the way it is? And like the proof will come out in the pudding, as it were, when we're standing and testifying in front of whomever. That would be my vote.
I will just say I've come around from where I was originally going with that. I think keeping it simpler is better, especially to Representative Arsenault's earlier point about the whole point of this is generating a bill number and name that can easily be shared amongst legislators in the hallways. And I think keeping it simpler is probably wiser.
Okay.
Wait, can we say, I'm sorry, can we just say equity impact assessment, or is that implied? I mean, that gives us a little bit of basis for being inclusive of the other identities and things that we mentioned. I don't know.
More just my answer would be just leave it open, leave it so that it's congruent with what the executive has, because that's going to be a lot of our push, is going to be the executive already does this.
So what does the executive have, though?
They call it an impact assessment tool. It doesn't say racial. It doesn't go through all the other protected classes.
I'm just going to say this and then I'm going to leave it alone, okay? I'm going to laugh about this. Mark, you might laugh about this. Yes, Ann, I feel that, but you got to name it. So I don't feel quite comfortable because impact, you can have impact in lots of different ways. It's not necessarily about equity. And just like we had those discussions about white supremacy culture and all that, and we couldn't say the words when we first began this group 6-7 years ago, we couldn't even literally say those words. And the fact that, no disrespect of how that got left out, but the fact that it's just called an impact assessment says something to me too. I felt something in my body when that was said, because it's like, wow, you were leaving off equity. Like,
I can speak to that.
What'd you say?
I can speak to that actually, because its very first iteration was the EIA, it was the equity impact assessment. And the reasons that was changed was because 1 or 2 years later, when we modified it to add a second component of performance management, at that point we said it's an impact assessment because it was primarily focused on equity and then also focused on continuous improvement type stuff. That's how that got amended. I think one good in between might be we named the tool directly, and that is, it just says impact. However, we are sure to include strong intent language so that it's clear that we're naming a tool that doesn't have that word in it, but rest assured that it is our intent to uncover, discover, and annihilate disparities based on et cetera factors. And I think that might be a good way so that way the tool, blandly named as it is, it's still strongly linked with a clear commitment to accomplishing a particular aim. Maybe.
For clarifying that.
Lisa?
Yeah, just to Susanna's point, would the short form bill, and I just don't know enough about this process and what it looks like, include those specifications around identity, class, ability? Would that be written into the short form part of the bill or no?
Somebody else got to answer that one.
I think if we're identifying which tool we want and those components are already part of it, then we don't have to. Right? Maybe I misunderstood the question. Todd, I see you with a hand.
I was just going to recommend as a second motion that we give the subcommittee the authority to draft the short form bill. I think we trust, my sense is we trust this group. We definitely trust the subcommittee. I think we've got language in the minutes, and our process certainly approves of a legislative proposal that would require some kind of impact assessment. If the subcommittee just puts together that kind of brief.
It's wordsmithing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious of if that could go into the short-term bill, and it sounds like the answer is yes.
And I would say it also sounds like the panel would like it, at least the word equity, to be included in there.
Do you want to vote or you want to nod your heads? We'll nod our heads, fingers, whatever. Okay, great. Thank you, subcommittee. And that's that. Any other issues regarding this proposed legislation? Representatives Arsenault and Christie, this is a great time. If there's a problem here to speak out. Okay.
I don't have any problems with this. I look forward to, to working on it and to seeing what the subcommittee comes up with. And I admit this would be my first short form bill as well. So I'm not super clear on exactly how detailed one is encouraged or kind of allowed to go. But I think based on the discussion, I think that we certainly have everything we would need to get started on a meaningful short form bill.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you.
Comment, Aton? There's
Oh,
people want from the community.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm trying to, yeah, give me a sec. Okay, we've got that settled. Thank you. Now, Mark? Mark Hughes?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay. You have the floor.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, I just wanted to chime in and just first of all thank Judge Morrissey for all the effort that she's put into this group. I've been watching for a long time now, ma'am, and I appreciate you. Appreciate you everything you bring to the process. So thank you so much. Also, I wanted to also wanted to just as I usually do, remind you of your name.
Yep.
You're Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel. That's who you are. So I like it when the work is focused on racial justice in the criminal and juvenile justice system. And it so often I'm here, and it feels like there's a drift from that. If you recall, in 2017, with Act 54, your enabling statute, the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission created a task force on all of the other systems of state government disparities. There's a report that was produced on that. I'm pretty sure most of y'all remember that, if I'm not mistaken. If you don't, that might be it right there.
Yep. Thank you, Mark.
I think the reason why I'm bringing that up is because there was some distinct focus that was intended for what it is that y'all are doing, and I had some frustration. Some of it I took out on Tyler last time we were together, and I'm still looking for some trend analysis from that OJJDP stuff, and we can talk about that later. I'd appreciate a response. I think, yeah, I think that the work of this group that has been together for the last 7 years has still failed to produce anything that's quantitatively productive, in my opinion. And
Okay.
I think it's still. I think there's some good work that's come out of this group. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't think we're able to measure the progress, any progress that we've made towards reducing disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system. We have not. And Deming said, if you can't measure it, you can't measure it. You can't manage it. So I'm hoping that the short bill that Coach is introducing, that calls for additional collection of data across the criminal and juvenile justice system, will move us in that direction, just like Title 20, 2366 did with policing data. That's the only reason why we're making any progress. It may not feel like it, but we're making progress with race data collection with policing.
Well, Mark, I would also hazard that there's been a lot of movement on those levels here, and that time flows, as you know, and we may not have had enough time, given that the Division of Racial Justice Statistics was stood up, within the last 18 months, and it's still not staffed fully. So, kind of a weird thing to say.
Well, I can't go tit for tat with the chair on when it's when I've just been offered an opportunity to speak as a member of the public. I actually, I think it's kind of inappropriate and unfair for you to come after me.
Oh, well,
Right
I'm
now,
always doing something wrong.
I just want an opportunity to finish speaking, but I can stop.
Please feel free to finish.
No, I'm good. I
Okay.
appreciate it though. I would have loved to finish, but I'll come back and finish another time when I feel like there's some space here for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Back to the issue about the secretary. As I was seeing it, there are two possibilities of directions here. And one, as I had said, was about more transparency, which would always be a more formal proceeding. And the other one is less formal and just go hire somebody. Not just anybody. That came out a little wrong. I mean, it's not like we're going to walk down the streets of Burlington and Shanghai someone, but we need direction from the panel about where people feel most comfortable. Is this something that we could just, as Sheila had said, put out a request for applications in a sense? I mean, what would we need, Todd? Something like that? Like a Vita? You're muted.
Sorry, my keyboard's really loud, so I keep muting out of concern that you can hear me typing. That was my thought, is that if the panel's comfortable with it, we would put out some kind of request. It wouldn't really be a full RFP. And, to Sheila's point earlier, I'm happy to, and maybe Grant, I could beg your help in putting that together, given your experience as the note taker, and then share it out first to RDAP to share with networks, and see what comes back. I mean, we have a small budget. There's no reason we shouldn't find someone who's interested, engaged, and whom we could pay.
Any further discussion on this?
I would just add that I appreciate that. I think that's a prudent path forward, and I want to appreciate Sheila's earlier comment about not having a panel member be subdivided in their ability to be present with this group. So I think that it's a really good solution to avoid that.
Okay. So Todd, you're gonna go with that one?
I mean, what I'm writing in the minutes is that I moved that the panel approve the AG's office to issue a request for interest, and it'll be submitted to RDAP first to share with networks to try and find someone to fill the role. It's not quite that. I'm running out of gas, to be totally honest. So
I understand that. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So that's where we're going to go with the secretary, and Todd, you'll get that to me and I can disseminate it or something to that effect.
Yeah.
All right.
Grant, I'll figure out how to track you down.
Thank you. I'm gonna just put the last item to the side. We've just got a very full schedule tonight and not a lot of time left. And I've been asked, Susanna said, can we run through a few bills that the RDAP may want to know about? And that seems critical. So Susanna, to you, please.
Thanks. And I'm going to ask Laura to help me. I'm just going to run through these really quickly because I imagine most of you already know about these, but I know we as a group said that we wanted to do this more regularly so that things didn't come to us as a surprise. So I just want to run through stuff really, really quickly. The first one is, and I have it in a spreadsheet, so I'm going to S9, an act relating to after hours access to orders against sexual assault.
Can you say that again?
I'm going to put them all in the chat. It's an act related to after hours access to orders against sexual assault.
Okay.
So like, I don't know, night warrants.
Sure.
The next one is H14, an act relating to prohibiting the use of animals in product testing. The reason I'm flagging it is because it's a new prohibition. So I think this group cares when we make things more penalty bearing. The next one is H118, an act related to expanding the scope of hate motivated crimes. The last update I got from the last time I looked at the last draft of the bill I looked at, it didn't really expand the scope of hate motivated crimes. I think it changed exactly one word. Laura, what was it? It was victim to went from victim to person.
It took out victim to like persons or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you want it's person or group of persons?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next one is S23, an act related to the use of synthetic media in elections, which is AI, false things about people. Yep, we have to be thinking about AI as a group now because the world is where we are. What else? S12, which is an act related to sealing criminal history records. So this is, they want to take expungement off the table and just do universal sealing. H32, an act related to treatment for opioid use disorder in correctional facilities. And we're tracking a couple of other things as well, including updates to, Laura, help me, Act.
I say H2, which is the juvenile raising the juvenile delinquency, which is also where raise the age, I think, was placed. I saw you earlier, Tyler. And then I know we had a few others. There's one related to housing that I'm not sure how closely we're following, but it's about the emergency housing program, which again, Tyler, you probably know more about that. I think that's H91. And then there's also some follow-up testimony that we're looking at for Act 180, which I think Act 180 of 2024, which I think was what, looking at you, Derek, what, H650,
645, I think.
thank you,
Yes.
from
Yeah.
last year. So just
Yeah.
follow-ups on that restorative justice aspect and court diversion stuff.
Okay.
So we can
Take-
offer a slightly deeper dive or a little, whatever procedural update we're aware of on any of those, but I just wanted to run down the list and see if anything piqued your interest as a group.
I would do the deeper dive. That was what I was sort of hoping for. I mean, I think it'll help focus our thoughts as a group.
Okay. So I'm going to go out of order then. We already talked about H118. It changes language from person to, from victim to person or group of persons.
And would it help, Susanna, because we have been pushing that bill from the AGO.
Oh, please, yeah. If you all know more about these than I do, then please tell me to be quiet.
Well, and Rep Arsenal is the sponsor. It passed the House last week. So it is over to the Senate. And essentially the motivation behind it is, as currently written, the hate crime statute doesn't allow prosecutors to put a hate crimes enhancement if the victim of the hate crime is not a member of a protected category. And that comes into play when a school or other public building is defaced by hate imagery. Somebody tears down and burns a Black Lives Matter flag, spray paints a swastika on a public building, or when a tenant's home is attacked, but the landlord, who is the property owner, is not a member of a protected class. The goal is to expand it to allow that hate crimes enhancement to be added on those criminal acts when it's clear that the goal by the perpetrator is to harm a member or a group. So it is not a big expansion, but we do feel like it's an important step to sort of allowing prosecutors to have the ability to add that enhancement on crimes that might not otherwise get it. Sorry, that was long.
No, it wasn't actually. Thank you. And I want to apologize to your office and to the representative, because that was backstory I didn't know, and it makes a lot more sense to me now. We already came out in support of it anyway and testified in support of it.
I thought it was great.
But we thought we were testifying to something much more basic, and I'm actually really glad to be corrected on the motivation. So thank you for that.
Okay. So that was
118.
118, right? Okay.
What else? S12. I'm naming the ones that we had more involvement in that we can speak to. S12 sealing, so that's universal sealing. So there's been a lot of testimony already. I think a number of entities here have provided testimony on it. I know we had a number of concerns and suggestions, and when I say we, I really mean Laura, who did the bulk of analysis on this one. But effectively, some of the main points that we had concerns about included not the desire to hold on to stuff, even though we say we're not going to look at it because we don't think it's something that needs to be looked at anymore, or we don't want to get rid of it. And I recognize that there's hesitation for government to destroy government records and act like they never happened. And also, we testified about things like digital punishment, the lasting impact that it has on people's lives. There was some testimony around employers' ability to discriminate based on criminal history. And we saw that as being related to one of the proposed provisions, which would have given the Secretary of State's office access to certain records in terms of making decisions about whether to license people for certain professions. So it gets pretty complex, and I can share more. Perhaps I can share our notes in writing if you all are interested, but that is basically the gist of it, is to move to a universal sealing regime. And I think that a few entities, I think the state's attorneys and perhaps others, have suggested extend the time period for them to be, yeah, Laura, please.
One of the things that we did that Susanna mentioned before, so there's a 10-year period of access once the record has been sealed for certain parties, which basically feels like everyone, if you read the bill, they are going to be taking out, I think, the OPR piece, as Susanna just mentioned. So we talked about that, and that's kind of where the management strategy comes in, as far as like, well, what happens if the 10-year period of access is what we end up going with as a body? What happens after that? And as Susanna was just about to say, the state's attorneys, I believe, are interested in doubling that. I believe there's also going to be a vote on that bill this Friday in the Senate. Yeah, we have a report. It's not published yet, but many of the recommendations that we made are in that report.
Okay. Does anyone know any background at all about S12? I mean, I thought, haven't we been talking about sealing, expungement for like a long time? And I thought we kind of came down as a state on the side of expungement, but I guess I'm wrong.
So if I may, we do currently permit expungement for certain criminal offenses. We permit sealing for other criminal offenses. We require expungement for certain, I won't call them offenses because they're dismissed or individuals are judged not guilty. The goal of S12, as I read it, is sort of twofold. It is, well, threefold. It is simplifying the overall system. It is expanding the number of crimes that potentially can be sealed. And it is shifting, as Susanna and Laura said, to a universal sealing rather than expungement regime. And the main debate, and I haven't followed it this week, but we have weighed in on it. The AG's office has weighed in on it. The main debate is really around what use looks like of those records. So, you know, access is a piece of it. People have raised concerns about roadside stops and access to records, old records. And I think on a fundamental level, at least the view from our office is it's a lot more about who can use them, not just who can see them. Because that use really is what ultimately is impactful. I think there's an interesting point around if I'm allowed to, if I have a criminal record that gets sealed and I'm allowed to say to an employer, a landlord, a credit bureau, et cetera, that I've never had a criminal record, but I have to tell a law enforcement officer if asked that I do, how do I as an individual start navigating that very challenging landscape? And I think, again, I haven't looked this week, so I apologize if it's sort of changing in any way around that. But I think the goal has been to harmonize all of that. But I also think it will get a different reading in the House if and when it moves to that chamber. Historically, just by way of background, because you were asking, Eitan, my understanding is there have been multiple attempts to kind of move in this direction. And last year, the House passed a bill that created this kind of sealing, and then after a certain period of time, what was termed super sealing, and it has been, hey, yeah, thank you, Laura, 655, and now the Senate is taking it up with, well, it didn't actually end up becoming an act because it didn't pass. All right, the Senate, it died in the Senate last year. And then it became a request for report or something like that.
I was saying it became a study committee essentially on the benefits of petitionless sealing, which is I don't think that has come up in S12, but that was basically what and forgive me, Rep. Arsenal, I believe it was House Judiciary, but I feel like that kind of was the initial intent, was developing this petitionless sealing process.
Yes, that was the hope. Because for lots of reasons, what we heard and then this became an issue. All of it became an issue really in the Senate, and so it was determined in the off session that this question could only come back up this session if the Senate started with it. so that we would have some indication that, you know, that it could actually move.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jessica Lee Smith, do you have a comment here?
Yes, I was just going to say, to play devil's advocate, be careful because with a ceiling, when you seal it, it's still under there. So somebody could get some
Right.
sort of a legal document to get in there for whatever the reason is. I find that in the experiences I've had and the people I've spoken to, the biggest problem is the person that's been hurt then can't access their records. And it always becomes something that's used by the other side for them not to get, you know, the help they need. I know with some young people I know, they've not been able to access their records, and that's really hurt them. So the idea, if you seal the record, it's still on there. If there's some stain on there that the person doesn't deserve, the best thing to do is expunge it because it's going to affect them, you know, in a permanent way, depending on who can get in there with what good lawyer, you know? All right,
Right.
thank you.
Thanks for the thoughts. I had never mind. Sorry, I saw something. I had an agreement with Martin Lalonde to try to get you'll remember I had mentioned it, you know, the draft bills to us in a lot of time. That hasn't quite worked. Lots of reasons, I guess. I will work on getting this list. I just did screenshots, so I know which ones I'm talking about. I will do my best to get drafts of these and to get them out to everyone. Alternatively, that will take time, of course. It's not going to happen in the next hour. You are at your leisure to take those bills in the chat and go to the website and read them. We're gonna have to discuss them if we're gonna be giving testimony, right? So the first step is to look at them. I will get them out as soon as I possibly can. It is not going to be overnight. Therefore, you may want to take these numbers and go look them up yourself. Okay? Thank you, Susanna, and everyone else who helped pull that together. Jessica's your hand just up?
Yes, I apologize. I forgot to take
No,
it down.
It's okay. I just didn't want to
Okay.
okay. No, that's
Thank you.
cool. Sure. No, thank you. I just, I didn't want to forget you. Um, the last thing here, and there's just not enough time because we really only have 4.5 minutes. When this panel was conceived, it was conceived, I believe, the best it could have been at that time. In its functioning, it has become very clear, certainly to me, that it doesn't work very well. We're dealing with that now, right? That's Martin Lalonde had said to me, I'll get you these bills. For whatever reason, he hasn't been able to do that so far. I, as an individual who has a life and a job and an elderly parent, do not have the time to just sort of hover around the Vermont legislative website and wait for a bill. So there are some structural incongruities between a legislature that is part-time and a panel that is not. And you're seeing that now. And this is partly why I think we're writing this proposed legislation and proposing it and getting help from Representative Arsenault, Representative Lalonde, Representative Christie, etc. Because last session, as you remember, and this is my old saw, because I'm really still angry about that, we just didn't get consulted. And part of it's the structural incongruity. I have raised this. Those of you who know the testimony that I gave in November to Joint Judicial Oversight heard me talk about that. I was hoping to inaugurate a series of conversations with a variety of legislators. Those have not materialized yet. Again, I'm not imputing some kind of evil intent here. It's the session. And things get dropped and people forget stuff. I am doing my best to remind people, but I think that there are going to be some interesting things that may get proposed that we'll want to discuss. And I'm only putting this out there to discuss. And one of them might be that we really need to meet more than twice a month, certainly during the session. That might be what needs to happen, are 2 meetings a month rather than 1 between, January and what, May. I'm not sure. I just got all these thoughts, and I wanted to bring all these up now, but we don't really have time, because we have 1.5 minutes left. But I do want you all to start thinking that there are some big structural issues here that we need to work through in order to do the kind of work that Sheila was talking about that actually resonates on to other generations. And in order to do that, we have to have enough time to grapple with this. There are going to be people who think, oh God, they spent the whole 2 hours just talking about that. You know what? And we got consensus on that. That doesn't happen in 10 minutes. It just doesn't. And that to me as chair is extremely important. If others have another idea, I can certainly step down. No problem. But I like it when we act as a body. I think we're stronger. The legislature, when they see, when I walk in and I go, hi, we agree as a body. That really has a profound impact. And so as much of that as I can do, I try to do. So that means time. If I step down, we will riot. Okay, not stepping down. But I do want us to think about the problems of getting that legislation, digesting that legislation, being able then to go back to the committees and subcommittees and so on in a reasonable way. It's not happening right now. And that's what we're trying to confront. So think about that. Think about that. That will come up again next month. It is 8:23, and I am still remembering fondly Jess Brown, who would get so annoyed when I do the whole Roberts thing about adjourning. So, because you're supposed to like make a motion and then blah, blah, blah. So how about if there's nothing else to say, everybody goes and has dinner?
Bye.
Sounds good. Thank you all for a very, very productive meeting. And I will all be in touch by email and such before the next one.